Good afternoon. As Vice Chair, I'll fill in for Chairman Ortiz today. I'll call the meeting to order. It's my pleasure to call to order the 12 o'clock p.m. regular PSVS meeting of April 16th, 2026. Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Member Abernathy? Here. Member Avery?
Here.
Member Campbell?
Here.
Member Harmon?
Here.
Member Garcia?
Here.
Member Madlin?
Here.
Chair Ortiz? Member Reed?
Here.
Member Rojas Mora?
Madam Clerk, next item, please.
Agenda item, public statements.
Statements for items listed on today's agenda are given a 2-minute time limit, 20 minutes total per agenda item. If you have written comments that are longer than your verbal statement, give them to the clerk, who will give copies to the committee. If you're here to make a public statement, please fill out a public speaker card and hand it to the city clerk. Madam Clerk, do we have any speakers?
We have not received any speaker cards for agenda item public statements, nor have we received any speaker cards for non-agenda item public statements.
Okay, very well. Next item, please, Madam Clerk.
Adoption of minutes. There's been a Scrivener's error, and the minutes are for the April 9th, 2026 regular meeting.
So the chair will entertain a motion to adopt the amended minutes showing them as April 9th, not April 10th.
So moved.
We have a motion
Second.
and a second. Any discussion?
Sorry, can you tell me who the motion was by?
Oh, the motion by Member Harmon.
And the
I
second?
didn't-
Reed?
Reed.
Thank you.
And Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
We'll be doing electronic votes today.
Oh.
It should pop up on your screen.
You got it. Thank you. Yeah, you know, hey.
The motion is approved with members Ortiz and Rojas Mora absent.
Madam Clerk, next item, please.
Item 4A, PSVS fiscal year 2026-27 recommended projects. 4 staff memorandums have been provided, one from the Finance Director, one from the Fire Department, one from the Recreation and Parks Department, and one from Technology Services addressing questions raised at the previous meeting.
Thank you. At this time, I will call on our city manager, Mr. Clegg, to provide comments to the committee regarding these proposals.
Thank you, Vice Chair, and just greetings for the entire committee. I apologize for missing last week. Was at a conference presenting on behalf of the city, but happy to be back with you here this afternoon. As noted, you received several memos that were related to the questions that came up at the last meeting. And those memos, I think, answer majority of those questions. We assume that there's going to be some follow-up questions based on that information that you received, as well as some additional discussion. I would just note one of the inquiries about some of the details and cost breakdowns on these projects. You know, we provided the details that were available for those projects that had some specific analysis and rationale. For some of our larger CIP projects, like our park projects, we typically have those. There's essentially like an engineer's estimate. It's an estimate of sort of the large chunks of those projects based on similar park project builds. But until we actually develop the bid specifications, we don't have that very detailed breakdown. And typically we wait until we have the clarity of the council appropriation saying yes, as a big chunk, we want to move forward with that project, and then we develop the particularly detailed budgets. But we have provided the information that we have up to this point on how those different projects were estimated. And at this point, happy to actually pause and just see if there are follow-up questions on any of the content in those memos.
I'm not seeing anyone
Okay.
raise their hand.
All right. Actually, if the clerk could pull up the PowerPoint, I just jumped right into answering questions on the memos. We actually had just a quick set of context setting, which is we would do the follow-up discussion, and then we'll have a couple of other pieces there. Are there other follow-up discussion that the committee members would like to have related to the projects that it's not referenced in the memos? Would be the next conversation.
Member Madland.
Hi, welcome back.
Thank you.
Actually, I was thinking, it's a question, I'll start out with a comment, but in the, the plan for the big park with the amphitheater. Now, that's a long-term, a lot of money spent on planning, but what about the gentrification then of that area around there? I mean, obviously, businesses will move in, the housing there will probably, I mean, there are a lot of plans, but then
Yes.
you're looking at moving an entire community
Indeed.
basically out of there.
Well, I think what we are anticipating is that there will be changes in the neighborhood, and one of this is a topic that of just I would suppose general interest, that it is very common when you see some of these revitalization efforts that you do see some type of gentrification, as you mentioned, and that there are different cities view that differently. Some cities view that as a positive, some cities view that as a negative, and want to ensure that the community members who are from that community can benefit from the more positive changes that have come to that community. I would first just say in either instance, the city has acknowledged that we do feel like this is a project that can change and uplift the whole broader neighborhood. It's not just about the park itself. It is about improving the entire neighborhood.
Well, they're going to have to move somewhere, though.
Well, we're actually not anticipating the park footprint itself won't take out any homes.
I'm not talking about the park. It's the, development that's going to come with when you have people, businesses are going to open.
Yeah, I mean, it is a likelihood. I don't, it's not. The project itself won't require it, but it is a strong likelihood. So one of the things that's happening in that same neighborhood is what's the TCC project that's happening right now, and that TCC project is in a broader area than just right around the park, but the park is kind of a hub and a center for these broader neighborhood initiative throughout the Lakeview and MLK neighborhoods. And they're actually looking at several neighborhood initiatives that are coming from state grant monies. The city actually received a $22 million grant that is helping to address some of the priorities of that neighborhood, like, and it was interesting. We held a community meeting and we asked the community what are the things they want to see in the future in their community, and they had some things like infrastructure improvements and public safety improvements, but they also actually wanted to enhance the awareness of community members on certain topics like financial education. They wanted to provide better financial education to members of that same neighborhood and public so that, again, they could make wise choices about, what do they do with their properties if things do go up, and, again, how do they receive some of the benefit of the overall changes to that neighborhood. And there's a group of community stakeholders and community-based organizations that are working as, and I'm forgetting the name of it right now, but it's essentially a big stakeholder committee that is working together to determine how to, best both improve the neighborhood, but also handle that change and transformation. And so they're considering some policies that are anti-displacement policies that, whether that's something they would want to promote and bring back to the city council for consideration in the future. That's something that is being discussed. But again,
But it all costs money. I mean, each topic and each conversation costs more money. And when you have, $300,000 for a 400 square foot bathroom, like a 22 million disappears very quickly. But it's just there's been so much money spent on the planning and this, and I understand what you're saying. It's,
Yeah, I think, again, Committee Member, I think respectfully, most of those determinations will be happening in the private sector. The city is not going to be spending additional dollars on any of those types of, displacement considerations or redevelopment considerations. We'll do what we do as a core service of streets and infrastructure and parks, but most of that will fall really to the private sector.
thank you.
Member Abernathy.
To follow up on that, you have a $22 million grant from the state of California, the state that's bankrupt.
We
So
do.
They're offering $22 million.
Well, we've already received it, and we actually have those funds that have come into our coffers. This is a grant that was awarded more than a year ago, and we applied for probably 2.5 years ago.
Well, I don't know how they get away with that. Between that and high-speed rail, they can't. Their pension plans are broke, and they're giving out grants. Yeah, I have a real problem with this proposal, the revitalization of part of town, that amount of money when we have the sewer problem, we have streets problem. So I've got a real problem with that. Thank you.
Okay, so if I could, Chair, just reflecting on the agenda here, we had these two items really, follow-up discussion and then the committee discussion on the new requests. I did just last year, there were some additional recommendations outside of just looking at the funding items, and so I anticipated there may be some desire for the committee to make other general recommendations to the council, and then we have one last slide at the end that will just outline the remainder of the schedule. But at this point, I think we can move forward to this second bullet, which is discussion of the PSVS requests. We understand the request from some committee members at last meeting was to not take them as blocks, but take them individually. You're absolutely more than welcome to do that. We've just teed them up into 2 slides here just to be as reminders. So this was the items that were in the recommended by staff, and then the second slide are the additional options. I'll go back to the recommended slide. I just wanted you to see both of these so that committee members are able to make motions in whatever, line by line, or somebody may want to take the fire items together. You may want to take them separate, but these 2 slides will just serve as a baseline to help committee members initiate discussion and motions on these 8 different items.
I have a question for you.
Yeah,
sir.
please.
With respect to the MLK Junior Park grant match, the $3 million item, as I understand it, this is to match a grant that we've already been awarded. Is that correct?
I'm glad you asked. That is not correct. It is to match against grants we've recently applied for. We do have an $11.9 million grant that we've already received, and this could serve as match against that, but actually we're trying to also get additional grants that the first phase of this project is about a $23 million cost to do the park portion, not the community center. And we have $11.9 million in that grant. We've received a large donation from Valley Strong. We received a allocation from the state of $2 million. And so we're getting close to that $11.9 million match to basically be the $23 million that we need. But we need a few more. We're about $7 million short. We need a few other grants. And this is intended to set aside match to go get the remainder of grants to fill the last gap that we're still filling on the full $23 million.
Thank you. Member Reed.
So on the MLK, this matches against prospective grants that you've applied for.
Correct.
Okay. And this is for, the $23 million is actual construction on the park itself.
Correct.
We're going to move beyond the planning.
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm glad for a follow-up question, because there's one piece I didn't answer in the earlier question, which was the $11.9 million grant. We have still some more time on that, but if we don't move forward with construction in the next 18 to 24 months, we could lose that $11.9 million grant. So we are anxious to close that gap and get moving on the park portion.
And how much of, if any, towards the MLK Park initiative is coming from the TCC grant? Is there any?
There's a small amount. The TCC had very specific criteria of eligibility, and we couldn't put other bigger portions of the grant there, but we were able to put about $1 million towards some of the trees and sidewalks, but I think principally trees that will offset some of the costs of that first $23 million.
Member Madlin.
So last week, the 11 million for the paperwork and design, that's spent and gone. Is that right? And then the 23 million starts rolling into construction.
So when I've referenced the 11.9 million, that's also just for construction. We spent some city funds and ARPA funds for the design of both the park and the community center.
And that was 11 million.
No, that was much less.
What did he say was spent last week? The gentleman from the parks. It was 11 million spent on design and or whatever.
We'll ask Mr. Anthony to shed some light on the subject.
Yes, that. Yeah.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Rick Anthony, Assistant City Manager. It wasn't 11 million that was spent on design. It's approximately about 3 million so far, but that design effort is still continuing. And again, as City Manager Clegg mentioned, it is a combination of some ARPA funding as well as some prior PSVS funding that we still are allocating for that effort.
Okay. Last week I thought it was 11,
No, it
around
wasn't
11 million.
11 million is the amount of the grant that
before
we
you stick
received.
it-
Yeah.
anything in the ground.
No, it wasn't that amount.
Oh,
Yeah.
was I?
11 million was the amount that we received from the grant. That's where that number comes from. So
And
we're
where is that
continuing.
money sitting, though?
It
And
is.
then the 23 million is something different. Is that correct?
The 11 will go towards the 23. So the 11 is half of, the 23. And again, that we do have that. Well, that money is actually a reimbursable grant.
It is.
We have to spend first, and then we get the money. So it's not sitting in our coffers gaining interest, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you.
I hate to beat this dead horse, but this $3 million that they ask us for the match, what happens if you don't get a match? What happens to the $3 million?
Great question. My recommendation to the council would be that we continue to keep this set aside to try and close whatever budget gap remains, because we want to get to the full 23 and go to construction. But it will be up to council determination whether they want to, just send these funds back to fund balance, or whether if we don't get a grant. But obviously, if we get the grant, then that would be the match.
Member
Has
Abernathy.
the council taken a vote on this whole MLK project at the dollar figure that has been rumored to be?
The council has taken a number of votes. The council has not approved a CIP project at the total of the estimated costs, because we haven't had a CIP project to put in front of them. But we have communicated with the council through the design process what our anticipated costs are. We anticipate this to be about an $80 million, total project if you include the park portion as well as the community center portion. And we actually are thinking about it in really probably 3 phases, potentially 4, but there will be, where the community center sits today, it would be demolished and we would start with a new community center, and we would have some enhanced parking lots with solar, panels, community garden, and we would redo the aquatics. And so we can probably parse out, the community center itself can't be phased very easily, the building, but some of the aquatics and the parking and sports courts that would be adjacent to that would be a different phase potentially. But yeah, $80 million in total. The City Council adopted our Parks Master Plan, which referenced that estimate, and they've adopted the design contract that assumes that it will be the full build-out, pending finances being obviously available. And so I think the council has signaled a majority support of this project in concept, but they've not voted on the full amount as a
They haven't
specific
voted. That's
project.
the answer I was looking for. They haven't voted for this. And it's not really part of a campaign here that was made for PSVS about swimming pools and basketball courts that I keep reiterating when we talk about these things. But yeah, I think this is a lot of money for a city that has a lot of very current explosive issues that we've told the taxpayers to pick up. So I think a wise council person might want to step back and get our house in order first before we endeavor like this. But I'm not on the council, so thank you.
Member Garcia.
Yeah, I think as we're talking about the MLK Junior Park, I, for one, do like the project. I think it's going to be very helpful for bringing resources and really putting MLK Park in East Bakersfield in the spotlight of what we can do if we invest, if we plan correctly. While at UCLA, I studied the Transformative Climate Communities Grant and found that it was very effective in a lot of different areas. And so I hope that the city, as it continues moving forward, continues to check in with the state of California, meeting the guidelines, checking in on how efficient it's going to be. I think evaluation is going to be very important with these projects to make sure that they're being fulfilled and what the goals and kind of outline of the project is being met to the best of its abilities. But I do know that the TCC program has helped uplift a lot of disadvantaged communities across the state of California. Its effectiveness has been shown, and I, for one, am glad that the city is working with TCC and with partners to make this possible.
Member Reed.
As we talk about kind of the, some grants that applications have been put in for this initial $23 million, which is like the first phase of construction, if we don't get those grants, where does that leave, the $11 million grant that's reimbursable, where does that leave, this $3 million allocation or other money that's been allocated towards that? Is there a path forward that says, hey, we can revise this $23 million budget for this construction down to something doable with the committed money that we have if you don't get to the full $23 million?
Yeah, good question, committee member. So first, I'll take up what happens if we don't get enough match to match the 11.9 in the next 2 years, which is the timeline that we have to move forward on that grant. That money goes away. We lose the $11.9 million. Also, rescoping the project is always possible. If we rescope the project, though, it could actually put at risk the 11.9 as well, because we received that grant under the commitment to build the park up to a certain scope and a certain scale. And so I probably wouldn't recommend any sort of notable scope changes so long as we're still in the grant window. If we don't get the grant, we don't get the match, we give up the grant, we hand back the $11.9 million. Can we still move forward with this project? To put it into perspective, it takes about $1 million per acre to develop a park. currently, and that's maybe a little on the light end. It might be a little bit more because that's a number that was accurate, maybe a year and a half ago. But that's a rough estimate that each acre of park that we build costs about $1 million. And this is a large park footprint. That's the good news about this being a larger regional park. And so I don't have the acreage top of mind, but that portion, does anybody have the acreage top of mind for that portion? About 15 acres for the park itself. And so even if you tried to take some of the amenities out, make a little less nice, it's still going to be a pretty big dollar figure just based on the scope of the size of the park itself. So could we do some reimagining, rescoping? Possibly, but more likely it would be we would just be on pause until we could identify other grants or more resources.
And so I guess I'm a little confused because the $3 million that we're talking about now, I understood to be matching for future grant applications or applications that you've already put in. So where are we on matching the $11.9 million?
Sorry, so what we're trying to do is use these other grants to be the match. And maybe that was where some of the confusion came in.
Okay, so that the other grants are going to be part of the match?
Be part of
and
the
then
match to the
3 million,
11.9, yeah. So, and sometimes it depends a little bit on the type of grant that you get because the $11.9 million is a federal grant. So we can't use other federal funds, but we can use state funds and we can use other foundation grants as that match.
Okay. So where are we in matching the 11.9 without those grants? I mean, how far are we?
We are short $7 million.
7 million. Okay. Okay, that's the 7 million number. Okay.
Member Madland.
For one, I think the project is a great idea of having a large park here and a nice one with an aquatic center. But didn't we spend money last year or the year before, a chunk of change on the aquatic center?
That was on the McMurtry Aquatic Center that was downtown,
okay.
Not on this new one.
And I think, it's just, so 15 acres at $1 million an acre, that doesn't make sense. But is it the right time? I mean, you need to get all your grant money and matched and get it gone. But then moving forward, is it the right time to go just all in, number one? And, with our sewer system, I mean, we can't be hit with another tax on everyone or fees, per household or apartment or whatever. Is it the right time to go all in?
Yeah, if I may, Member Madeline, I think one of the reasons that staff would recommend this as a recommended, not just optional item is because we've invested design monies and we've invested in community engagement. I do think that, and we're close to being able to have enough funds for the park portion. I think that is a reasonable first phase. And then your question about is it the right time to do another $50 million for a community center? That's a big question for the community and for the council. But if it's going to be a challenge to build that community center immediately because of, economic conditions. If we can deliver on the park portion and then take a step back and consider what is the right timing on the community center, we've still been able to maximize the grant opportunities and deliver on a new park portion for the community. And that may give us the ability to wait a little bit longer on the bigger community center.
The point is, we have some big city issues, obviously. I don't know. I'm sure there's more than our sewer system. But just, getting that project done, let's get your feet underneath you. And, it's just the timing of it and trying to go all in. So thank you for that clarification on that.
Member Garcia.
I think it'd be helpful. When did this planning for TCC first start? When was the first maybe community meeting that happened? I know this is the second application I think that the city submitted that was approved. When did that first meeting happen? And then a few more questions as well. How many meetings have happened for TCC in East Bakersfield? And how many residents would you say have attended these meetings? And let's not include duplicates if you have the kind of unique member attendance.
I'll do my best. I'll give you estimates on the number of attendees without duplications. And we do have that data, but it's not top of mind. So we actually received a planning grant for TCC first, and we used that planning grant over a couple of years to develop an implementation grant proposal. So if you go back to the first conversation about TCC, it was before I was city manager, and it was probably in 2018 then Councilmember Gonzalez and the city manager had talked about pursuing this planning grant and then ultimately going towards implementation. So it's been a very long time. The implementation grant itself has been probably 4 years in the works. We've held numerous community meetings. I actually couldn't tell you, but dozens and dozens of community meetings around this topic. And as one example, we had a community summit that had about 100 individuals from around the neighborhood, but we've had multiple other engagements. And so I think, by the way, for those that may be, less familiar, typically you have a pretty, small per capita, number of folks who come out and engage, in person in these activities. But we have had several hundred unique individuals who've engaged in one of our engagements throughout the different meetings. We've had meetings at the senior center. We've had meetings at the current MLK Community Center. We've had many meetings in schools throughout the area. Friendship House has been a location that's hosted numerous meetings. And so, several hundred individuals and lots of community-based organizations have engaged on this TCC project over the last 4 to 8 years.
Awesome. Thank you. No, I just wanted to clarify that information. I think I attended a TCC meeting in 2022 at the Senior Center. I think there was about 35 people there when I had attended that. But that was, I think, just a one-off in 2022. But saw a lot of good engagement, a lot of, I think, big Post-it notes, a lot of whiteboards, a lot of brainstorming, planning, coming from community members themselves who live down the street from the park, on the street of the park, just throughout East Bakersfield, who were really excited about this kind of investment and the fact that the city was coming to their community to get the feedback on how they can best implement this, right? And I think that's a change that I've appreciated seeing in how the city interacts with community, and I hope it can continue to do that for future projects.
Mr. Clegg, I have more of a comment than a question, but I've expressed previously in previous meetings of this committee my dismay at the use to which we've put the PSVS money after the marketing campaign that was conducted in order to obtain the revenue. It is interesting to me to learn that this MLK Park project was initiated back in 2018, and that's prior to the ballot measure, prior to the estimates of the revenue that we would receive by increasing the sales tax by 1%. And so when you see those projections that we would gain an additional approximately $50 million a year in revenue from that 1% sales tax increase, and even factoring in rather high rates of inflation over the last few years, we are still receiving far more revenue than anticipated in that ballot measure. And even if secretly in their hearts, despite the marketing that was done, Councilmember Gonzalez and your predecessor, Mr. Tandy, had meditated a plan to spend $22 million on MLK Park and use some of the public safety money that they were asking the public to give them to hire 100 new police officers and reduce gang crime, that still doesn't account for the additional $67 million in revenue that we are projected to receive this year that is all spent And so while we have a great parks department, I've expressed previously how much I do appreciate the parks in this town. We have an excellent parks and rec department. They do a great job. And it's nice to have these nice things. We still have to be responsible with the public purse. And this committee has been impaneled, at least to pretend to have oversight over the use of this money. And the city, we saw in the numbers last time, is planning to take approximately $12 million of PSVS money and just dump it into the general fund because the general fund doesn't have enough money to cover all the stuff in the general fund. What would we have done without that extra $67 million that we got that we didn't plan on? So there's a failure of planning and there's a deception. I don't know if it was an intentional deception, but kind of a clever way to fund all these things that were not contemplated by the public in a vote that barely passed. And so as a person tasked with the duty to provide some oversight or feedback to the city council, I can't help but protest the use of public safety money for extra things when the city is completely strapped to the point where we can't even cover the general fund with the general fund tax revenues. We have to take $12 million with no oversight at all and shore up that fund. And then we have this big sewer problem. All that extra money, if you had taken the extra $50, $60 million we get every year from PSVS money that, according to the marketing campaign that was done, we weren't going to need. We only needed $50 million to provide all these wonderful safety upgrades and to deal with homelessness and deal with gang crime and reduce response times and hire 100 new police officers and all the stuff we were promised. If we had set that aside, we wouldn't have to raise everybody's sewer rates because we'd have the money sitting there that potentially could have been used. So while I appreciate the fact that we're trying to improve a part of town that needs to be improved by putting these nice upgrades at MLK Park, and not everybody in every house in Bakersfield has a swimming pool. We have a very hot climate here, so it's nice to have pools in places where people can't afford to have their own swimming pool. I appreciate that. The question I have, though, is why are we making the decision when we are clearly over budget on everything else to take money that from a fund that's not supposed to be used for this kind of stuff, and we're using it for this kind of stuff. And when we go to apply for these grants, it's not mandatory that we apply for a grant that then requires us to commit additional money that we don't have to match the funds from the grant. So I don't disagree with my colleagues here that this would be a great project, and the facility at MLK Park would be a beautiful facility if it's finished. But giving feedback as part of citizens' oversight, I protest the use of this money for this purpose. So that's all I have to say. Does anybody else have any comments? Ms. Madlin.
On that note, since, the use of the money's kind of gotten off base a little bit, if we're going to use it, would the community not be better served with that sewer system being repaired in a long-term problem-solving thing for the community, for your pocketbook at the end of the day, which things are tight, and our household expenses are exorbitant now, just trash and everything, water. But that just made me think, if we're going to use money out of the realm of the PSVS money, would it not be better to herd some over towards fixing that sewer problem?
Is that a question, committee member? I'll treat it as a question and just. I'll treat it like a question and a couple of different thoughts. One, it is the purview of this committee to opine on whether or not you feel that an item is consistent with the spending criteria that were established. And one of the reasons that staff has recommended this and why council has approved expenditures that are similar to this in the past is that it is our assertion that it is consistent with the criteria. I don't think we're outside the bounds of what PSVS was meant for. That is I guess, an interpretive, an opinion, but my opinion is that it is within the spirit and letter of what PSVS was for. Number one. Number two, City Council, when we looked at our challenge around sewer, frankly, we considered every option. All options were considered because it is a big challenge and a big lift. Why we have not considered the use of PSVS 1, that was not actually one of the criteria established for PSVS, although I think on a quality of life you could probably make that argument. Two, that utilities typically pay for themselves, and you can raise utility rates to pay for utilities, and utility systems are designed and intended for the ratepayers to pay for those systems without general fund resources. Can you use general fund resources on enterprises? You can, but that means that much less general fund to do the core services like police, fire, public works, parks, which is already underfunded. So we would be taking away from our general fund programs to fund a utility that the ratepayers should, the rates should be designed to support those rates. And then the last thought is, a $3 million allocation will do very little to solve our sewer challenge. Now, if it was a $50 million, as was suggested, that would have a significant difference. $50 million per year into sewer would have a really big difference. But these one-time monies, and again, these are all one-time recommendations, not to further commit to lock up all of the PSVS in the future. We're trying to leave some of the PSVS funding uncommitted for ongoing purposes so that we can continue to do projects like this. So, a $3 million one-time allocation would do next to little to solve our 20-year sewer challenge, whereas the rate changes do address that through 2050, the needs of our sewer system.
Well, but if the rates are supposed to maintain the sewer system, how did we end up here?
That's a great question. We've discussed it at length in lots of community dialogue. There's three principal reasons that.
Well, someone wasn't doing their job is what happened.
Yeah.
Because if your comment that these rates are supposed to maintain, improve, and anticipate growth and smarter ways to recycle sewage, man, it's worse than I kind of first started pondering the idea of what the heck.
Our rates were insufficient for a 20-30 year time frame, yes. And I will say as well, as I've said publicly many times, that inflationary factors have not helped. State regulations that have put increasing burdens on local governments to treat to different levels have also increased costs more than I think people anticipated 10 and 20 years ago. But the bottom line is our CIP set-asides for 20 and 30-year replacements just were not included in our rates historically. And that's been the problem, and we're trying to reset that, even though it's very challenging.
Member Harmon.
Yeah, one of my big concerns is taking the fund balance all the way down to zero. I was doing some math up here from your report, which is good, thank you. It has the $65.8 million for personnel expenses, other expenses at 10.4 in non-discretionary, and then 21.7 million in discretionary, and 12 million to other funds. That takes us above the 100 million approximately that we expect to get in. Where does that leave us next year, assuming there's just a modest increase in sales tax?
Yeah, great question.
Are we going to be underwater next year, or if we take this balance down to zero? I appreciate your comments.
No, yeah, great question, committee member. So we are anticipating allocating budgets of $117 million. And you've noted very accurately that we're not receiving 117. What that difference between what we're going to receive and what's available, it is one-time savings that is available. And I think to your point, could the city council, and this committee recommend that we leave portions of that in just contingency and in fund balance? That we could. But there's the broader picture is we also have fund balance of the total general fund that is beyond just PSVS fund balance. And so we do have notable fund balance for the general fund outside of that difference between the 100 million and the 117 million. And so what we are in a scenario, total general fund, though, is we are spending down some of our fund balance in this year's budget. We anticipate doing it again in the next 2 years of budget as we've been doing reductions. And so total general fund, we anticipated about a 5% reduction in personnel costs in the general fund because we do have a structural deficit, a structural challenge. And we're on a 4-year plan to reduce that structural deficit with the use of some modest fund balance while we continue to keep up fund balance. So we do have fund balance. We're not, expending all of that. But I do think it would be within the purview of this group to say, we would recommend not fully allocating all 7 million that's, one-time monies being considered and leave some of that for fund balance or contingency.
Thank you.
I have a comment that kind of follows up on both of the prior remarks here. Number one, this issue with the sewer, I recognize that that ship has sailed. We haven't saved $350 million that we could spend on a sewer upgrade. But going back to the projections for the revenue for PSVS, we've more than doubled that. And then the city decided to spend that money. And not just spend it, but commit the city in the future to millions and millions of dollars of ongoing costs. And so then the sewer crisis comes up and we have to raise everybody's rates. And I can't help but get the sense as a taxpayer and a member of the oversight committee that this lack of foresight on the part of the city, and I'm not trying to be unfairly critical here. I realize there are certain variables that we can't foresee, which is something we should also foresee, that we can't foresee everything. But we shouldn't be blindsided and then simply rely on the bottomless pocket of the taxpayer to make up the difference when the crisis hits us. So when we think we're going to collect $50 million a year to satisfy all the needs that we have, both expressed on the ballot measure and in the ordinance that nobody else read, we should stick to that. And we didn't. And now we have the sewer issue, and we got to raise everybody's rates because we didn't plan for that. So my question is, what is the next thing? What is the next crisis that will require the taxpayer to again reach into their pocket or let the city reach into their pocket to deal with another unforeseen thing or to spend money like a drunken sailor on things that we should have been more careful about. So as part of our role in providing feedback, and I looked at the text of the ordinance, it doesn't say that we're to simply say whether we think something is consistent with the objectives. It says that the committee shall advise the city council on goals and objectives associated with the revenues imposed by this ordinance. That seems pretty broad. So whether they heed our advice or not, the advice I would have is live within your means, and if you think that something is only going to cost a certain amount, and you budget for that, and you market for that, and you collect more money than that, there's no rule that says you have to spend that money. It doesn't have to burn a hole in the city's pocket after they took it out of ours. So that's my comment. It deals with both of these things. Now we're spending to the very last penny. What crisis will befall us next year? Or we won't have any of this money left. We won't have a carryover. We could have had $350 million carried over, or $300 million, or $250 million that could have been very helpful with a lot of these problems or with an unforeseen crisis like the sewer crisis. So That's the advice I have to the city council, is stop assuming that there's a bottomless pocket of somebody else's money that they can continue to dip into when they don't foresee expenses or when they want to grow the government. I'll leave it at that. Anybody else?
Yes.
Oh, Mr. Harmon.
Yeah. Could you remind me really quickly? You mentioned some private money was raised for the grant for the park. How much was that?
We have a $1 million grant from Valley Strong. There's a few other smaller buckets, but that's really the notable one. We got a $2 million state direct allocation and a $1 million a donation from Valley Strong.
How did that come up? Was there a community outreach looking for donations or something? I mean, we all love parks and we want parks, and the community would probably be willing to participate in a well-designed project.
Yeah, so our Parks Department did create a capital campaign strategy and a capital campaign plan. We actually haven't implemented every phase of that because we were starting with some of the bigger chunks. And so we did, it was based from outreach from city staff to Valley Strong. We actually have reached out to other entities as well. We do have some interest from other entities. And I failed to mention that earlier too, is part of closing that $7 million gap is grants, but we're also going to continue to pursue philanthropy and other donations. And what we're finding is when you have sort of a pretty big number that is less specific, it doesn't serve as well to communicate exactly what are we going to deliver for the dollar that they donate. And so we're trying to close that gap to where you can get to a place to say, hey, this is how much we need to complete this specific project, and we're getting close to being able to go back out and do a little bit more push on that capital campaign to say, hey, we need $1-2 million to finish this project. That's one of our goals.
All right, thank you.
So if I may, Vice Chair, just make a suggestion that you've discussed a fair amount, the MLK one. You don't have to start there, but just, again, one of the procedural aspects is to take up these items specifically, and for the newer committee members, for your benefit, typically one committee member would make a motion about each of these items to say it is or isn't consistent, and then the committee can work through those, but you don't have to take them up in any particular order.
Unless the committee have any more comments or questions for. Okay, I'm sorry to reopen this.
That's okay.
But I didn't want to cut anybody off.
Yeah.
Mr. Garcia.
Yeah, I think as we're talking about the use of the funds, I echo and agree with a lot of our commissioners in terms of the importance of how we're using, these tax dollars and funds. Could you explain a little bit about? I'm looking at the budget for 2025. I see that there was from the adopted budget of 2024 to 2025. There was a difference in an increase in the budget for police and fire. Is that correct? Can you tell us how much the increase in police and fire was?
Off the top of my head, I cannot. Maybe
Okay.
Mr. McKeegan can look that up and with some speed. And are you referencing the general fund or PSVS specifically?
And that's where my question was going to be headed. I saw also in the proposed budget there was a reduction in recreation and parks, as well as economic and community development. I think a few million from that and a couple million more for an increase in police and fire. How does the city balance this increase in police and fire departments with general funds and with PSVS funds?
So I'll answer that in a couple of different ways. First, one of the reasons that we're seeing a challenge in the total general fund is that our general fund revenues have gone up at a slower pace than our general fund expenditures. And that's not because we're doing new programs. It's just the base cost of doing the exact same thing. So insurance costs, and you're probably all seeing this in your own personal lives as well as your own, your professional experience, that liability insurance is up, our workers' comp is up, the cost of our employees to be competitive in the market is increased, our CalPERS costs that they require of us that we don't have a lot of control over are up, our utility costs are significantly up, and so just providing the exact same level of service has increased significantly post-pandemic. I mean, everyone's been experiencing these inflationary factors. The good news is our revenues actually are up. I mean, in a normal economy, we would probably fare a little bit better. Our revenues have been going up between 3 and 5% every year. Unfortunately, our costs are going up closer to 8% every year without adding new programs. Did we add new programs in the post PSVS world those first few years? Absolutely. We've hired and budgeted for the 100 additional police. We added more than 20 fire staff. We created the park ranger program to also create public safety. We've added our code rapid response teams to address homeless encampments. But we've also done a few other programs, but principally the ongoing adds to the Public Safety Vital Services tax have largely been around public safety. We also created our Community and Economic Development Department, or Economic and Community Development Department, and we've pursued some ongoing economic development initiatives. And then the reality of the general fund is the general fund was, very challenged before the measure and has continued to be challenged post-measure. And most of the work of the general fund is the costs are mostly police and fire. The biggest portions after police and fire are also parks and public works. And so when the general fund has seen these same increases to just the same level of service. We haven't added levels of service to the general fund, but it's costing us more. Proportionately, most of those cost increases are coming from those larger departments as well. And so we've seen significant increases in affording the same number of positions that were in the general fund to support policing and to support fire. They're costing us more today than they were 5 years ago. And so the general fund revenues have not kept up with the general fund expenditures for, again, the same level of service. And that's why, to one of the points that was made earlier, we know we have to live within our means, and so we're also asking for reductions across all departments. And so that the city council is going to be making decisions about reductions of positions across the board. And this is not just in maybe what you might consider some of our discretionary areas. We have pretty limited discretionary. Most of our services are still fairly core services as a municipality. And so this year, we are going to see reductions in employees. We're eliminating 70 positions, and that was one of the questions that came from the last meeting. We provided some of that information about how many of those are from PSVS. So we're eliminating 70 positions in next year's budget. And I'm coming back to one of your points. I know I've covered a lot here, but for example, our Economic and Community Development Department is seeing a 50% reduction in dollars that are available to that department, whereas police is going to see a 5% reduction, fires just less than 5% reduction. But we are seeing reductions even to those departments just because the reality of living within our means is a challenge. But we're significantly reducing some areas that are again hard choices, but not as high a priority as, for example, public safety. But so some of how we balance those, the increases and the decreases is based on a prioritization of priorities as determined by the council and with feedback from this group. And so for that reason, some departments are seeing more steep of reductions than others. Mr. McKeegan has some numbers for you.
I got to stay within my wheelhouse here. So, Committee Member Garcia, thank you for the question. So what I did is I just looked at, you were looking at the 25 budget. So what I did is I compared 25's budget to the 26, the current year budget. And what we see is the budget in the general fund for police increased by $28 million, and that included $6.1 million in PSVS dollars. Now, if you asked about community development, so economic and community development actually decreased by $1.8 million last year compared to this year. And then recreation and parks increased by $1.4 million in total, $316,000 in PSVS.
Member Avery had a question.
Can I not ask a question?
Or a comment, I'm
Can I
sorry.
make a motion?
Certainly.
Would that be acceptable to make
Certainly.
a motion?
Certainly.
Given that we've had no negative discussion about the fire department, the police department, and the fire department. I'd make the motion that we fund those 3 items on this proposed budget, and that's my motion.
I would second that motion.
Just to clarify, since this body doesn't have the authority to fund anything, you're moving to find that these proposals, the $738,900 Bakersfield Police Department radio site generator and fuel tank replacement, the $250,000 firefighting turnout replacement, and the $141,000 fire station 5, 6, and 13 HVAC replacement are consistent with the PSVS priorities?
Correct.
All right.
Second.
With that clarification, we have a motion from Member Avery and a second from Member Harmon. Any discussion? Member Reed.
Yeah, I had one question in response to some questions about the turnout. We were provided some supplemental information, and thank you for the supplemental information. I think it was very helpful in clarifying. But I did have kind of one follow-up question with respect to, it was identified in the memo that we received that we are replacing 162 turnout coats and 157 pairs of turnout pants. And so, and that sounds like that number is $719,500. And one of the questions that I asked was, what percentage of our total inventory is that we're replacing? Is that correct by interpretation of what you've stated? And what percentage of our
Yes,
turnout
Committee
gear
Member,
is
thank
that?
you for the question. So after talking through our vendors and other departments who have started this OSHA compliance and new testing process, the hydrostat testing, they have indicated to us that turnouts that meet this lifespan with an activity of Bakersfield Fire Department is commonly going to not pass this exam and in turn require replacement by the OSHA standard. Once we get into that testing, we'll know exactly what's happening. So we don't know for sure whether all 179 of those turnout coats and pants are going to fail. We expect a majority of them to fail, and our plan is to slowly phase those in. As far as a total, how many of turnouts, the estimated amount of turnouts that we're speaking there, it's roughly about 45% of our turnouts.
Okay.
About half of our turnouts are between that 5 to 10 year lifespan.
And if I may, another way to think about that is like the bigger dollar number is our estimated full exposure. Why are we budgeting less than that? And in full disclosure, the fire department had suggested, hey, why don't we budget for full replacement? And we said, how about we phase it and wait and see on some of the testing to see, let's not replace everything until we know we have to. And so, you know, it is an estimate, but we're estimating that we won't have that full exposure this year, but by the next year, we'll probably have more to get to the full phasing.
Okay, because then that does kind of answer, I think that addresses my other question, is the 719,000 number. I was going to ask if the balance was that coming from general fund money, since we're only looking at 250, or is the total turnout allocation for this year is going to be the 250 strictly coming from PSVS funds?
Correct, the latter.
Okay.
And that we would anticipate having another allocation in a future year to make up the balance.
Okay. And one other, and I'm sorry, I dive into the weeds occasionally, so bear with me. The hydrostatic testing that you're referring to, is that a new requirement? When did that go into effect?
It is a new requirement. It's a requirement that NFPA's had for a little bit. OSHA is now adopting it. And what the hydrostatic testing does is it really tests the turnouts and the effect of turnouts against steam. I will say Bakersfield Fire Department's been fighting fire for a long time. We're a very active department. We tend to fight fire in a style where we don't tend to see a lot of steam. So in turn, we don't injure firefighters with that type of injury. But it is a risk out there. And now that OSHA is adopting that, that's something that we have to test for, and in turn, we'll see some of those turnouts fail because of that. So it's not necessarily a new standard; it's a new standard that OSHA has decided to adopt. And what's happened is, I believe in Title 8, Section 342.3 of OSHA, they have adopted the NFPA 1851 and 1850 standards. And when there's changes made to that, then California in turn has to adopt those standards also.
So have we not, if those were previous NFP standards, have we not been testing our gear to NFP standards?
So we do test our gear. NFPA is one of those agencies that it's recommendation. NFPA throws a lot of different recommendations out there, and some of them are driven by industry, some of them are driven by safety standards. And so what we do as a fire department and as a city is we look at those standards and see which ones operationally are efficient and work for our organization. And of course, we adopt some of them. But there are a lot of standards out there that are just fiscally unable to adopt. For example, there's a standard out there where you have 4 people on a fire engine and 5 people on a fire truck. That's not how we operate here in Bakersfield. We operate fine with 3. A 4th would be great, but we operate fine with 3 firefighters on an engine. So there are some of those standards out there. We have to realize that some of these standards are driven through different parts of the country and different departments based on their hazards that they see, and it gets incorporated into the NFPA standard.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Member Madland?
Just real quick, what do you do with your retired gear, such as that? These are pretty expensive.
They are. I will say they're very expensive. When we are finished with them, nobody wants them. We dispose of them usually in either try to recycle them or throw them in the trash bin. One thing that Bakersfield has done very well at is we have ways to clean our turnouts, which really enhances firefighter wellness. So when we go to get rid of these turnouts, they're commonly very degraded. They are not contaminated because our washing, our extractors, and the way we clean them avoids that stuff. But they're so broken down that commonly
They're that broken down because I've seen, especially in fire equipment, there's a big secondary market.
Yeah.
Primarily that non-OSHA approved, whether it's other states or over the border.
Certainly.
There is a big secondary market for that.
There is.
If you could ever recoup, especially specialty equipment, I would think your recoup with used high dollar pieces would be right at 25-30%. So it's just an idea. I don't know.
And it's a valid idea. On our turnouts, they're in such bad condition that myself as a firefighter and the fire chief, I would feel uncomfortable passing along to another organization to use them to actually fight fire. They are in a state where we couldn't do that.
There are just markets that they don't have anything.
Yeah.
That's my thing, whether it be donated. But, it costs money to do all that, and I
It
understand
does.
that. So
we do save some of it for our cadet program. We have a cadet program for our young individuals between 14 and 17 who do not go and fight fire. They just need something to wear and be identified and be able to train in. So we do save some of that gear for them, and they get to use it.
All right, is there any further discussion of the motion that is now before the body? All right, hearing none, then I'll ask the clerk to either call the roll or set up the system for an electronic vote.
The vote, are they going to restate what we're voting?
Yes, we're voting on determining whether,
To remove the MLK part.
no, we're just voting on the fire department and police department proposals. That's So we're within the scope of the motion. I think the vote is active.
The motion is approved with members Ortiz and Rojas Mora absent.
Thank you. Are there any additional motions based on the presentations that have been made?
You can also go to the next slide if that helps. These are also items that were under consideration as optional for council to consider.
Yes, Member Garcia.
Yeah, I see that on the slides today, there's these 4 projects, but on the initial proposal that we'd received, I thought there was more projects under the optional item. Am I mistaken on that?
Can you confirm, Randy, if I missed one there?
I saw maybe about, unless they're all bundled up under one, but I saw park security cameras, 250,000. I saw.
I can go, these are the slides that were shared prior, I believe, but we'll go and look through there.
In the initial packet that we were provided, there were several projects that were not provided in the presentation last week.
Yeah, it was,
okay, from
it
the
was the
memo.
initial
Yeah.
memo. It had both recommended and optional projects that were not included in what we actually considered.
Yeah, I think there was like 13 total projects,
There's
4 and
projects
recommended.
projects that we didn't consider
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, so one of the reasons for that, and we apologize, we probably should have parsed that out better in the memorandum, is that typically projects that have been approved in prior years by committee as being consistent with the guidelines, we don't necessarily bring that same project back again in subsequent years if it's the same, basic, project and category. But we can, I think my recommendation would be to, take up those that are here in these 2 slides, and then we can come back to those that may have been on the memo that aren't on these slides.
If I understand correctly, we were advised last week that the items that are not in the slides before us today, the council was not seeking our advice on.
Correct.
So
That's
I think
correct.
that, just to clarify, because the memo was far more substantial, but
Yep.
it got narrowed down.
That is accurate, Vice Chair. Thank you.
Member Reed.
But just to clarify, just because the council was not seeking our advice does not mean that those projects are not actually being considered, correct?
That's correct.
Yes, as I understand it, the city administration is operating under the understanding that those items have already been addressed by a previous iteration of this committee. And so that's why we're not being asked.
That's correct.
All right. Any further motions from the committee? Member Harmon.
Yeah, I move to find that the MLK project is not a recommended use of the PSVS funds at this time.
Is there a second? Second. All right. Any discussion? Member Garcia.
I disagree with that motion. I think, as mentioned on the packet here, I do think that this project supports the following PSVS priority, specifically enhancing amenities throughout the community to improve the quality of life and attract visitors. And just even reading the initial language, I see that we are funding police and fire, which is great that we're seeing that increase in that investment in public safety. But I also understand that if we're looking at police, who got an increase in 28 million, 6 million coming from PSVS, and Parks and Rec got a 1.8 million increase with, I think, a little bit more than 300,000 from PSVS. I do find this to be consistent with PSVS and with some of the language on the ballot measure as well that indicated, how this money can be reduced. If we really want to target crime in our community, we have to both invest in public safety, which is, police and fire, and make sure that our communities feel safe in that regard. But we also have to tackle the root cause of crime, and we have to understand that offering services, offering activities for young people will help keep them off the streets. It will help keep them from joining a gang or from joining a crew of young people who want to maybe, cause mayhem or cause havoc in their community. And I've been to the MLK Center. I've seen that they have basketball leagues, young people of all ages. They have food banks. They distribute food to the community. They are able to truly be a center that is a home for young people who sometimes don't have a home after school or don't have a place to be able to go and do their homework or to go talk to other young people without getting into a life of crime. And I think if we want to be serious and recommend this to the council, we have to understand that the root causes of crime have to be addressed as well. And we can't just be trying to play catch up after the crime has happened. We can see that that does not help us here in the city of Bakersfield. It does not help taxpayers to continue to see a pipeline into crime. And without there being adequate opportunities for young people and for people of the community to go to try to change their life, to try to improve their circumstances, we're going to continue to see crime increasing. And I do think that, again, this project does fit the criteria and will help reduce crime. It will help proactively address crime before it happens as well. And, we see that has happened all over, in multiple cities and multiple states. And I think we need to continue investing in our community so that young people have a place to go and to not fall into a life of crime before it happens. Thank you.
Member Abernathy had her light on.
Yeah. A couple things to think about when we talk about building swimming pools and basketball courts. McMurtry is owned by the city. It's 1.3 miles from MLK. It's 15 minutes on a bus, and the children get free bus. I know that because I'm on the Get Board. But they're not out of this world right now, and they do have some of these facilities. But we have a pretty nice facility there with a pool, and schools have basketball courts. It's just right. What we're talking about is the PSVS money was specific, and we're getting a little bit beyond reach here, but I think that's important to notice as well. We have facilities on the east side of town and very close to that area, and free transportation.
Member Reed?
I guess in part I would agree with both of those comments. I do think it's important to consider and continue to invest in our parks as a method of diversion to some degree from a public safety perspective. And I think on the east side that's definitely needed. When you look at the facilities of MLK Park today, I think there's some definite attention needed to those facilities. Whether that's, I think it could be open for discussion as to whether that's kind of a total, kind of gut and replace is the way it kind of sounds like we're doing. But I definitely think that this use is consistent with PSVS, especially when you look historically at the amount of money that we've spent already on Parks and Rec. And the alarming thing for me is that the parks that we've spent money on, how many of those are in neighborhoods that don't experience the level of crime and have the public safety issues that East Bakersfield has. And so if the money, to Committee Member Abernathy's perspective, if we were saying that we were going to spend this money on a pool, I would be wholeheartedly with you. I do think that the McMurtry Aquatic Center is accessible and is used for those. So I don't know that I'm on board with a pool being at MLK and that being a priority need. But as far as having the parks and the facilities there, I definitely think it's a good use and a need across the board. So thank you.
Member Madland.
On that point, I mean, could they not pull funds from some of these other park projects? If it's better spent on, on everything that everyone's brought up, on crime, on educating young people, having a place for them. Let's throw it at the problem because it falls under crime and the prevention or hopefully help, and then I don't know, just a thought.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with you. I'm not opposed to saying that, some of the park some of the park expenditures or projects in other areas get cut to get this project done and get it off the list. So I'm not opposed to that at all either. So I mean, I think whatever it takes to get the park facility itself up to a standard that matches the rest of the community or the rest of the city, I think is needed.
Member Harmon.
Yeah, I just will comment that my motion was to find that the use of the funds is not a recommended use of the PSVS, not that it's inconsistent with PSVS, but it's not a recommended use.
When we're dealing with budget, those are my comments on this. I speak in favor of the motion. We're talking about the allocation of scarce resources that have alternative uses. And I think we need to be careful not to assume that the alternative to this $3 million being used on MLK Park is that somehow we remove the pool that's already at MLK Park, or that we remove the gymnasium that's already at MLK Park, or the softball field, or the picnic tables, or any of the other amenities. That's not the alternative. The alternative is, at this time, we don't spend these scarce resources on an upgrade to the existing facilities. And so I think we need to be careful when we have kind of a fatalistic idea of the importance of this $3 million. It's not going to mean that people won't have a park to go to, or that the amenities that are there are going to be somehow torn down and taken away from them. There are amenities at that park. There is a pool there. There's a gymnasium there. I've been to both of those facilities. I've played softball on the softball field there. I believe there are basketball courts there, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know that we have pickleball courts, but I can tell you anywhere in the city that the city staff would recommend spending this money to upgrade a park right now, given the state of the budget and the state of the economy, I would say no, absolutely no. I don't care what park it is. I'm not being discriminatory on any particular neighborhood or park. I was against the use of money for the Mesa Marin project, and I personally make use of the Mesa Marin facilities at least once a week. It's just that is not, in my view, an appropriate use of this money. And so I urge my colleagues with those thoughts in mind that I have nothing against the MLK Park or this upgrade. We just shouldn't use this money at this time for that purpose. And so I speak in favor of the motion. Are there any other comments or discussion on the motion before we go to a vote? All right, hearing none, I would ask the clerk to call the roll or put it up for an electronic. Yes, the motion from Mr. Harmon was to find that the $3 million for MLK Junior Park grant match is not recommended by this committee at this time. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. So if you look at your screen, you should have the ability to cast a vote electronically.
Yeah, I think, is there a question about the way it's appearing on your screen?
Yes, a yes vote is to find that it's not recommended. So it's voting, yes is voting no on the money. No is voting yes on the money. Essentially.
Confused.
Yeah.
Yes.
You were voting at it, and I was like, all right.
Right. Whenever we have these negative, we find we're making a recommendation in the negative, it's confusing. But
The motion is approved with members Garcia and Reed voting no, and members Ortiz and Rojas Mora absent.
all right. Now we have 4 items on the second slide that have not been the subject of any motion by this body. Is there another motion from any member of the committee? I know that it's probably not the normal procedure for the
Yeah, the
party
committee does
chairing the
not-
meeting to
I
make a motion, but filling in for our chairman, I don't think I forfeit my right to make a motion. So I'll
Agreed.
move that the committee find that the 4 items on the second slide are not recommended uses of the PSVS money at this time.
I'll second that motion.
So we have a motion from the vice chair and a second from Member Harmon. Is there any discussion? Member Reed.
Question, do we have any detail around the park access improvement? Like what is that, or what parks is that, or any detail around that? Or is that one of those general slush funds?
We do have a little bit of details on that. Our Parks Director can speak to that.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Darren Budak, Director of Recreation and Parks. Yeah, for the park access, there's particular parks, Jastrow Park being one of them. The access road is just that. That's where our park staff and then all the event organizers stuff, they go into these parks and that's how they access them. It's our safe, approved route for maintenance within the park.
Okay, so when you're talking access, you're talking like the access road where they pull into like the center of the park to get access to various...
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Member Garcia.
Yeah, I guess as we're discussing parks, I guess it's a question for the city manager. Can you remind us on the criteria that's outlined on those 13 points within or measure priorities? Who developed and approved those priorities, just for confirmation?
Yeah, thank you, committee member. So as the outreach was being done related to this measure, there was a survey that was done that identified what are the areas of interest of this community. And based on that survey, a resolution was prepared for the city council. So there was the ballot language itself. There's an ordinance that was adopted, and then there was actually more than one resolution, but there was a particular resolution in which the city council said these are the 13 criteria that we will use to determine what is eligible for funding for public safety vital services tax. That resolution that was adopted by council was based off of the feedback that came during the outreach phases of what the community desired to see improved through the use of the tax.
Follow up. One more question and then a comment after that question. And it was, again, just to confirm, that same city council who developed these priorities who also placed the measure on the ballot in 2018?
That's correct.
Okay. Then, yeah, I think, again, I'm going to disagree with this motion. And, I think it's helpful, again, to understand what the insight of the current council was who, drafted this language, who worked with city staff, city attorney to make sure that they understood the language, that it was consistent with what, their idea of what this measure could accomplish was. And it's good to hear that the same city council who drafted and placed this measure on the ballot also drafted these measure priorities, because it really does help give us as PSVS commissioners insight as to what that council was thinking at the time that it planned it. And so to know that that same council who placed this measure on the ballot also identified measure priorities like measure priority number 5, keeping public areas safe and clean, like number 9, reducing homelessness, 10, addressing the fiscal stability, 11, creating jobs through economic development, business retention, attraction, and workforce development. Measure priority 12, enhancing amenities throughout the community to improve the quality of life and attract visitors. And measure priority 13, enhancing neighborhoods through additional code enforcement and improved park maintenance. And I think that does often, it matches what the ballot question says. Crime prevention, address homelessness, retain, attract jobs and businesses, unrestricted general revenue purposes. And so as I'm, again, just putting myself in the mindset of that council and putting myself into, what these 13 priorities look like in execution, and looking at the ballot question, I can't help but come to the conclusion that this is consistent with what that council put on the ballot, the community outreach that was done, and then ultimately that was passed by the voters. It sounded like there was multiple layers of discussion and communication to get to these 13 priorities. And so, with that, I'm going to be voting no on this, and urge our other commissioners as well to really consider what the council's, mindset was during these times, and how these 13 priorities were developed and now are being used to reflect, investment in many of these measure priorities. Thank you.
Member Harmon.
Oh, I would just add that one of the priorities is also addressing the fiscal stability of the city. As Mr. Campbell referenced, we're talking about scarce resources, and part of our job is recommending the use of the funds, not whether or not it's consistent with the ballot measure, which allows the money to be put in the general fund anyway. So really anything would be consistent with the measure. As according to my reading of it, there's very little that would be inconsistent with it. And our job is primarily recommending to the city council how the limited resources should be used.
Anybody else?
Question?
Oh, Mr. Avery.
So I'm kind of naive again. So if we don't allocate all the funds that we collect revenue for in a given period, does that money get saved for a future period to use for future issues? Kind of going with your position is maybe we need to save for a real rainy day that might happen in Bakersfield. So does the money stay in the pot, or does it get allocated to the general fund?
Well, for sake of clarity on that last portion of that question, the Public Safety Vital Services tax is a general tax, and it is part of the general fund. It does go into, if we don't allocate those full resources, they are available for future expenditures. We do track with an agreed upon procedures our PSVS revenues and expenditures distinct from the rest of the general fund. And so we can track, unallocated amounts of PSVS in any given year, to future years. But the answer to the big question is, if we don't spend it now, yes, it absolutely stays in the bank and it's available for future needs. Just as a reminder, PSVS resources in the first couple of years of this committee and the council, significant portions were set aside in a rainy day fund. And so we have $56 million that have been set aside in a rainy day fund that is completely different from our fund balance. That's our reserve fund, and it is only touchable based on a policy established by the city council. We have not touched our rainy day fund in these recent years when we've seen some tightening. It's not time to dip into the rainy day fund because it's not truly a rainy day. It's just a changing economy, and we got to revise our spending to be within our means. So that $56 million remains in the reserve fund, again, separate from our fund balance. Just again, as a side note too, for edification, particularly I think of our newer members, the Government Finance Officers Association recommends that any municipality set aside 2 months of working cash. And 2 months might sound like not enough in the private sector, but government revenue sources tend to be fairly consistent. Our revenues are not as elastic as some other revenue bases. And so that's the recommended standard, is to have 2 months reserves set aside. And that's 16% of your budget. Most municipalities do not achieve that recommended standard. Most municipalities are probably in the 5% range. Some can range up to 10%. And large cities within California, I just know this because we've done this comparison to see how we're doing against other large cities. There's only 2 other large cities that meet the Government Finance Officers Association's recommended reserve fund, and Bakersfield was the third. And so we're I would just share that we are in a good position with our reserve fund, that we have set those resources aside. But in uncertain times, it is not unreasonable to set aside additional, and that's that's within the purview of this group as well, to recommend that we continue to set aside further contingency beyond the rainy day reserve fund.
Member Reed.
So the money that you've said, that you identified as being set aside, this 56 million in reserve funds, is that PSVS money set aside, or is that general fund reserves?
It's a combination of the two. We actually have a big portion that's PSVS and another large portion that's general fund, and we do track those distinctly.
And if the day comes that we start spending that money, would it be spent strictly as PSVS funds, or would it be spent as general funds?
The policy that council adopted actually does not distinguish that. It doesn't say that it has to be in those specific buckets. I think that will be a question that would probably be answered when that time came. But the council did not dictate in advance that there would be limitations on spending it out in sort of two separate ways.
Because I guess the question and point that I'm getting to is, if the money is not allocated this year and we have a fund balance going forward, and fund balance being differentiated from reserve, is it going to continue to be looked at as PSVS funds and have some level of earmark or limitation on funding and spending, versus is it just going to be, hey, it's general fund money, we're good to go, let's go, and don't worry about any question?
It has been treated as separate and distinct since we've started budgeting, with those revenues, and we anticipate continuing to do that. That's why we can give you a number like 117 million versus the 100 million, because we know that that other portion is specifically PSVS.
Okay, thank you.
Member Harmon, did you have a comment?
Oh, no, Mr. Clegg clarified that. The 17 million extra we have is the fund balance.
Yeah, specifically PSVS.
Right.
I'll speak once more in favor of the motion. This is my motion. Just to clarify, we're not here to divine the intent of the city council when they decided to put this measure on the ballot. We're not the Supreme Court trying to interpret the intent of a legislative body. We are tasked with perhaps a more difficult task, and that is to represent the taxpayers who voted to provide this revenue to the city. To remind everyone, the actual language that was on the ballot says to prevent cuts / improve 911 emergency response, police / fire protection, anti-gang / drug units, neighborhood police patrols, rapid response to assaults, robberies, gang violence, home burglaries, crime prevention, address homelessness, retain, attract jobs / businesses, unrestricted general revenues or revenue purposes, shall the measure be adopted approving an ordinance establishing a 1-cent sales tax, providing $50 million annually until ended by voters, requiring independent audits, citizens' oversight, all funds for Bakersfield. So the council did pass a resolution, and there is an ordinance based on the passage of this measure. Let's not fool ourselves into thinking or imagining that when the public voted on this, especially when there's all this discussion about police and fire protection, improved 911 response times, reduced home burglaries, gang violence, robberies, and then we bury somewhere in the middle of this paragraph, unrestricted general revenue purposes. After the plain language of robbery and assault, we use government lingo. Unrestricted general revenue purposes, when we could have told the public on this measure whatever we feel like spending it on. I don't think we should fool ourselves into thinking that the voters who barely passed this measure anticipated that the citizens' oversight would find that spending $580,000 of their money to upgrade pickleball courts at Siemens Park was something that the public was really clamoring for and wanting to spend their money on from this extra tax when they're already paying sales tax. This is an actual burden on everyone in the city. That poor people pay sales tax when they buy food, when they buy clothing, when they buy anything, household goods. Everyone pays sales tax. And so it's not an insignificant thing when we're talking about these luxury items like pickleball courts. Now, I don't hold it against anybody who likes to play pickleball, but is that the priority? And so we're the ones who have been asked to provide feedback to the city council and advice on whether this is a good use of our money or this money in particular. And that's why I made this motion. I don't think it is. And so I'll invite my colleagues to make any further comments, or we can proceed to the vote. Ms. Madland.
Yes, actually, when this vote came about, my interpretation and the way it was sold and presented to the voting public that got everyone behind it so much was the police, fire, gangs, those type of programs. Of course, I didn't read the rest of it. I don't think many people did. I'm just like, that's a great idea, and voted on it. I think just about everybody I've ever met, that was their opinion. Now, these other ideas are great, but when it was sold and advertised and on the ballot, I mean, I didn't read all of it. I voted on the first part that I, read, which I think a majority of the people did.
Any other comments? All right. Well, then we
I
should.
just want to make one
Mr. Avery, go ahead.
public comment. I joined this group for public safety.
Thank you, Mr. Avery. Any further discussion of the motion? All right, I think we can proceed to the vote. And just a reminder, this is like the last one. A yes is a no to the money. A no is a yes to the money.
Remind me again what we're voting on.
We're voting on saying that these four items that are on the slide before you now are not recommended by this committee for use of PSVS money.
The motion is approved with Member Garcia voting no and Members Ortiz and Rojas Mora absent.
All right. Okay. There were a couple of other items on the city manager's slide.
Yeah, there were just two pieces. One was, and I think some of this has already occurred throughout the meeting, and we'll still capture the comments of committee members. And again, as a reminder for our newer members, we take minutes of this meeting a little differently than your standard meeting, because the typical action minutes of a standard meeting are very brief, but we still take the comments of the committee as they make recommendations for feedback for the city council, and we document that and provide that to the city council, as well as when there are votes that are in the minority and someone has expressed a reason for that. Historically, we've included those, for the benefit of the council as well. So the feedback up to this point will be part of our record back to the city council. I just left this space, and if there are any additional recommendations outside of the specifically proposed budget items, we left a space if the committee wanted to make other recommendations to the city council in general. And then the last piece was just to, revisit the remaining scheduled pieces of the city council's budget deliberations for the benefit of the broader public.
Member Reed.
Thank you for that to ask some additional questions and maybe have a little bit more conversation. I'm going to refer to the memo from Mr. McKeegan regarding PSVS committee inquiries. And one of the items presented there was the breakdown of the one-time operating cost of $12.9 million. And I was just wondering if you could provide us a little bit of color around the two largest and most significant items listed contributions to outside entities for $4.5 million, and outside service contracts for $6.5 million. If you could provide a little bit of color as to what those items specifically were.
I'll ask Mr. McKeegan to do that, but before he does, just one quick note is that as we were putting together the slides from the last meeting, you note that the amount of general fund transfer was an estimated amount. Even this $12.9 million is actually an estimated amount based off of last year's budget, because we've been actually doing these reductions in budget across all of the departments. And so that 12.9 is actually more of a reflection of if we carried forward the same amounts as last year's budget, and we actually expect we're going to probably see a few reductions there. Just know that. But Randy can walk through what those two big chunks represent, even though we're probably going to be making some cuts in those areas.
Yeah, I won't hold you to the exact dollars, but
Yeah, for sure. As I mentioned at the very last, it was based on estimates and our current information that we had at the time. So let's just talk about the contributions to outside entities. If you look on the second box, the majority of that is made up of those reductions. So the contributions to outside entities were the numbers we anticipated based on our budget from last year. So that 4.5 was reduced by that 3.2. So it makes about 3.2 of that is community revitalization, homeless services outreach, economic opportunity areas, economic development strategic plan, economic development incentives, and business assistance incentives. Now, if you want specifics of what those accomplish, I would have to reach out to ECD on all of the outside entities that they provide those services to and the payments to. But that breaks down the majority of that $4 million.
so the contribution to outside entities, the breakdown is this 3.2 in this second category.
In addition to other items.
Yeah, and then a few other.
And the contracts to outside services, the reason we call it, in essence, one-time costs or costs that potentially could be cut, or they are contracts to outside services, but they are, in a lot of ways, essential services that we rely on. Things like the security, downtown security, and the security that we pay for throughout the patrols that we pay for. It's about $1 million that we have for those services. In addition to that, there's some cleanup services that are done related to homeless cleanups, those types of things. There's also services related to public safety that they charge. For example, there's software services. There are activities related to, again, related to software for public safety. I think that one of the things is, an example is the taser management and those types of things. In theory, those are essential services, but those can be cut if they potentially wanted to remove those services. So it's really just contracted services that departments use that are in many ways part of the standard services that they provide, but they could be cut if the council determined that they needed to reallocate those funds.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess one other question, because I guess one thing that I expected to be a part of that number was some of our homelessness center services and expenses.
Yeah, no, the costs of operations of the BLNC are actually considered ongoing. We don't, the facility has been constructed. We anticipate it'll continue to operate. So that is about an $8 million item from PSVS, the operations contracted services for BLNC, and that's not included in those numbers.
And just to say a little bit more about why we consider that ongoing, it's not an assumption that it will be there forever and in perpetuity, but it's about the level of commitment. So when, for example, when you hire staff, the ability with our labor unions and our ongoing commitments to walk back from a full-time position equivalent that we've added into the budget, that's more significant than, let's say, a cleanup contract that gets renewed year over year. We can always determine if budgets get tighter, we say we're just not going to do that next year. Whereas the BLNC was a 5-year agreement, and to basically say we're going to stop having 300 shelter beds would have significant impacts to our ability to manage, homeless encampments and whatnot. So, in the spirit of trying to be, I think, fair about what is a longer-term cost commitment, we have included that as ongoing. It's just like with staff, we've eliminated 70 positions this year. You can always reduce staff, and you could reduce the number of beds or stop providing the service at BLNC, but it's such a large core service that we've just included that in the ongoing number versus some of those smaller contracts that are $500,000, $1 million, that year over year, we look at them every year and say, do we keep doing that or not? It's much easier to turn that off than it is to turn off a homeless shelter.
And I would, I mean, I agree with that. I don't dispute any of those statements. I guess the only thing I would ask is, at what point do we evaluate kind of the cost benefit of our dollars being spent on homeless activity and start to look at, hey, we're spending money and we're not having much impact? Because I've seen some presentations by other organizations that the dollars spent versus the results are very different from what I've seen from our city dollars. And so it's kind of one of those things where I'm saying, why aren't we spending money like those people? Because they're getting, there's a dramatically different impact. And, so at some point in time, I'd like to see that would happen with some of our homeless dollars, but I'll leave it alone for the moment.
If I may, committee member, we make that evaluation every year and every month and every week. And we are making that evaluation, and that's one of the reasons that we've also been, considering a huge change in, what is under city governance and what is not under city governance around jail beds. And it's been for that exact same, analysis that we're doing is, what will it take to see the level of change that we need in our community? I won't try to answer all this question right now because it is an incredibly complex space around homelessness, substance use treatment, behavioral health treatment, and health care, being provided to individuals, and the state systems and all of the network of support to individuals, who may be at risk or, in many instances, making even bad decisions on their own behalf. It's incredibly complicated. But one of the evaluations that we do make is, what is a bare minimum of services that needs to be available to address some of the core challenges and problems? I think if we took every dollar out of BLNC and said we're going to put it over here, it leaves another gap in the system that may cause unintended consequences. But where do we get the biggest return on our value? And in creating a system that addresses all the needs, we do think that, unfortunately, I think as a region, and we're not in control of all these dollars, of course, right? We can only control city dollars. We can't control the healthcare industry dollars and the county dollars, but we're advocating to our county partners and healthcare partners and being willing to even put city resources on the table to say, if we can get ahead of some of these issues, we're going to save more money in the long run, and we won't need these big dollars going towards these other services. And I think one of the reasons you could potentially argue, why didn't we do that, 5 or 6 years ago? Part of that was expecting our community partners who have the dollars and the jurisdiction to address those problems, that they would have done that. But because they haven't up to this point, we're now saying we may have to reallocate some of our resources to address those issues.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree that, I mean, it's not like I'm sitting here saying I know the solution either, or know who has the solution. I don't think anybody does at this point. Thank you.
Member Madland.
I just had one thing to get to the city councilman was the vacant position reductions. There's 9 from the police department out of 17, since we've gotten pretty hard on what some of these funds are for.
Was that a question or just a comment for the city?
comment.
Okay, thank you. Member Reed.
And I would also point out on those positions, you know, I did comment last time kind of what was the last fill date. And so the last time those positions were filled dates back some time. And so I think, you know, the one thing that I'm leery of is when we say that we're cutting positions, but yet when you look into the detail, we're cutting positions that we haven't had anybody in and haven't spent any money on in several years. And so is that really a cut? And I mean, I know from a government number perspective it is, but in reality, no, it's not a cut because we haven't spent that money. And so I'm leery of calling that a cut and calling that a saving.
I think that's fair, committee member. One thing that is important for this committee to be reminded of is that we started a hiring freeze intentionally as of June of last year. So anything that is, you know, June and forward was a pause on a position that had prior been filled. Anything that's older than June, I think that it applies to your precise, you know, thought process, and that does apply to some of our public safety positions. In fact, as we've you know, continued to hire at a, you know, a remarkable pace, we've also seen, you know, exits, so we haven't, you know, been, you know, fully staffed. We were fully staffed a year ago, July, for a few weeks, and then, you know, we had some additional departures. But yeah, we intentionally initiated a hiring freeze last June because we could see the structural imbalance that we were going to need this year to make significant cuts. And so many of those positions have been vacant since June or July because we put a pause on filling them in order to be able to make cuts by attrition instead of laying off people in their spots.
Yeah, and I definitely appreciate that. Obviously, nobody likes to see layoffs of people that are actually in jobs. But also to Committee Member Madlin's comment about the number of police positions being cut. One position that you see on here multiple times is this police report specialist. And I guess my perception of that position, you know, my take on just kind of inferring from the title is how much of that position is going to take, you know, cutting these positions and not filling these positions, how much is that going to take from police officers that are on the street to where if I'm involved in a crime or something serious, that it's going to extend the response time because they're out taking reports, or if I need a report taken that's of a lower level nature, how many hours longer is that response time going to be delayed because we don't have these lower level positions to do some of that work?
Yeah, you're thinking.
And have we considered any of that stuff in
absolutely.
the whole big picture?
Yeah, absolutely. The questions you're asking are precisely the right questions, and they're the questions that we've been, you know, deliberating on because these are challenging choices. A couple of principles as we've made reductions is that we are looking at where we can gain efficiencies. So, and you happen to pick a great example where we've been able to enhance the ability of folks to make reports online significantly in the last 4 to 5 years. There's also newer software tools that make it easier, and we actually can use some of these software tools to speed up the report process. We had lots of people taking phone calls and transcribing it, and then repeating it into our system. Not a good use of time, and so we've found some efficiencies that have allowed us to actually reduce these positions without seeing major service level impacts. Those are why in this first round of reductions that are on that list, because it doesn't impact as much the service levels. So also for what it's worth, and I think this was shared a little bit at the last meeting, you know, we've actually asked the departments to provide to us what are the service level impacts for every reduction that we're asking them to recommend, so that we can balance those and say, well, this service level over here reduction is difficult but acceptable. This one over here is too much. We don't want to make that service level reduction. And so we are thinking about that. We're also thinking about, obviously, you know, the folks who do the work on the streets, on the front lines, that operational value that they have is huge. What's our span of control? Are we too top heavy? Or do we have too many vacancies in the bottom? We're looking at all those considerations to make sure that we're not making reductions that are not going to really get us the value, even if it helps us get to a dollar number, but it doesn't represent that actual value. We're trying to be very smart in making those reductions that make the most sense from a service level impact is really our baseline of how we're thinking about it. We have to get to our target numbers, but based on service levels.
All right. Mr. Clegg, I just have a comment to give some feedback to the council, and that is that this concept of citizens oversight, as I read the ordinance, it's an ongoing thing. And it seems that the items that have been previously considered by this committee, once the committee's voted on them one way or the other, or then later the city council votes to use the money one way or the other, then it's considered done. It's a done deal. No more oversight is needed or requested. And I don't know if I would agree with that interpretation of the concept of oversight. I think it's supposed to be an ongoing thing, and it's been treated as this is already done. And so I would invite the council to consider the concept of oversight and what do they expect from this committee, because the ordinance created the committee, or at least compelled the council by resolution to create the committee. It would be helpful to get some feedback from them as to what they expect, and perhaps set up some guidelines for considering things that were previously considered to see if that's still a good use of this money. I think that's part of oversight. And so I would encourage the council to reconsider that. Also, I realize that we ask the council to do a lot when they come to these meetings. They don't get paid very much to be on the city council. It is a sacrifice. They are public servants, and they get a lot of material that city administration prepares because that helps them do their job more efficiently. My concern is that the feedback of this committee is perhaps lost at sea amongst the other items that they have to consider. And so I would ask that the council perhaps make some time at one of their meetings, put us on the agenda so that if I were to say attend the meeting and address the council, it wouldn't be limited to the public comment time, but perhaps be put on the agenda that any member of the committee who wishes to have some prepared feedback for the council specifically would be invited to participate in that. So those would be my two items. One, give us some guidance. Let's actually take the idea seriously or admit that we never really meant it to begin with. And then secondly, give us time to speak directly to them.
If I may, committee member, because this is a topic that I think has been growing and need to address, I think, as the Oversight Committee was established and as in the early years, there was a lot of content to be discussed and a lot of content to be reviewed. And we're at I think a natural transition point where it makes sense to say, let's think hard about what is the purpose of the Oversight Committee. And I think just being super candid, I think somewhat by default, in those early years, it made sense. Hey, if we, last year we talked about 100 cops, we don't need to talk about 100 cops in year 2 when we talked about it in year 1. But as, large portions of the ongoing are now, committed and allocated, and seeing, smaller numbers of, CIPs to consider each year, what really is the role of the Oversight Committee, I think is a fair question to ask, like going forward. What is our intent there? And I think, for what it's worth, there's, many communities have oversight committees and they have, slightly different looks and feels, but a lot of them have some consistent, roles and responsibilities. And so, we have an obligation to deliver an annual report to this committee as a sort of city in general. I think we feel that obligation as staff to, provide a report to this committee every year. But then, is there an opportunity for this committee to provide that report to the city council and to also, acknowledge that, yeah, we have received a report that the agreed upon procedures were conducted, in the audit process. And so some cities will have the committee provide a written report to the city council that's, authored by the committee to the council, as well as a verbal report, as well as just, contemplating what really is, the role of the oversight committee. I would just offer one caution, a respectful caution, because I do think it's fair to ask about what is the role of the oversight committee. There is a natural tension when you create checks and balances where it's important to have that check and balance. And when largely the activity is being conducted within the purview of, let's say, a tax measure, then I think sometimes an oversight committee might feel like, what are we able to do? What's our role? Whereas if, things were way out of bounds, way offline, you're there to check and provide that check and balance. And, when largely the checks and balances are in place, there's, I guess, it's not very controversial to say, yep, the checks and balances are in place. But that being said, I think as designed to give recommendations to council, that's in the ordinance as it exists today. I don't think you have to change the ordinance to be able to say, what is the role of this body in giving recommendations to the city council? It is pretty open-ended. And I think that council could even go back to the resolution and consider making some adjustments to what they're asking this committee to do on an annual basis. I think that's a fair ask.
Well, and regarding use of PSVS money in the general fund, last year we were asked to vote whether we thought that was consistent with the objectives. This year I saw in the, I don't know if we were asked, maybe we weren't.
You were not, but that's okay.
We might have voted on it anyway.
You did.
We were asked.
Yeah, you did, and we provided that feedback to the council.
But this year there was more. There was like $12 million and or $11.9 million to be transferred to the general fund, and I would question whether that's even legal to not have oversight of the use of that money, because it's actually in the ordinance so maybe it's neither here nor there right now, but my point is we're not really abiding by the guarantee that we gave to the public when we asked for this money. When the city asked for this money, it was almost like this assurance of accountability for its use. Don't worry, we'll have a citizens oversight committee. And then we've just gotten comfortable not getting oversight on the use of some of the money. And so I'm uncomfortable with that. And I would like to express that to the council as well, that just taking this PSVS money without even bringing it to the committee to even consider its use, it's not exactly oversight. So I guess it goes back to my previous point about clarifying what oversight is expected, what is sought, what is the ongoing role of the committee.
Yeah, we'll pass both those pieces of feedback along. Just for factual sake of clarity, the amount that was assumed that could be a transfer for this year was the same as last year, not an increase. And in fact, we expect it will actually be lower than it was last year, but your point still stands.
Thank you. I couldn't remember the exact number, but all right, Mr. Harmon.
Yeah, I share a lot of Mr. Campbell's concerns. It would just be nice common for the city council it'd be nice to know how we can actually be really practically useful to the committee or to the council and help them out. Because otherwise we kind of run the risk of turning into the jaded lover from My Fair Lady. You'll beg for our advice, our reply will be concise, you'll listen very nicely and go out and do precisely what you want. And we don't want to get to that point. And so knowing how we can actually practically help them out and the things they'll take seriously would be helpful.
Member Reed.
I would agree with both my colleagues here on that direction. And one thing that I would maybe add some specificity around, the ongoing expenses. I understand when we're talking about headcount, when we're talking about people, but in some of these categories where we're talking about, I mentioned the homelessness, and you said, well, that was a 5-year contract. And so I guess my thought would be is, and my ask would be is, hey, at that 5-year mark, when we're getting ready to renew that contract, then I would personally like to see it come back to us and have some discussion about, not only is this consistent with the with the intent of PSVS, but is this a good use based on the results that we're getting? And I would like to see some other metrics around the use of the money, around some results of the money, not just, yeah, we checked the box and we finished this project and, oh, look at it, isn't it great? But in some of the ongoing things that we projected and stated in the measure we were going to use to address, some of the public safety concerns, and, can we point to some successes around some of that money specifically? And I just used homelessness as one of those, but I think going forward, I would definitely appreciate seeing in that annual report some more specificity around being able to see some tangible results, and maybe some more specificity around some of these big buckets of money. So.
Okay, any more comments from the committee? Okay, I think
we can conclude. This last slide is for the viewing public. For the record, just to note, there's several more steps for the council between now and June, and we appreciate your committee's work this cycle. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And, I don't think we need it. We can adjourn by common consent. Thank you. The meeting's adjourned.